Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for staying with Citizen TV. We're continuing with our live coverage. My name is Trevor Mbija. On the day when the budget is just about to be read, just moments away, and we've seen the PS for Treasury, Chris Kipto, is already making his way to Parliament any moment from now. This is Kenya Kwanza's maiden budget, and coming in amid stiff opposition from the tax proposals in the finance bill.
Oh, that's right. I'm Victoria Rubadiri. We are continuing with our wall-to-wall coverage of the 3.6 trillion shilling budget, to be specific, 3.59 trillion shillings, that will be tabled in Parliament today. We'll be speaking to our reporters on the ground to get the people's expectations just hours away from the budget reading. Well, it could be an hour.
Yeah. Or just a few minutes.
Or
from now,
that.
because you can see
Exactly.
already there's movement coming from Treasury heading to the National Assembly. Chemtai Goin, Stephen Leto, Seth Olale are covering Parliament from all angles for you. Faisal Ahmed is at the Treasury, where any moment from now the CS, Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, is expected to make his way to Parliament. Ben Kirui is speaking to the people on the expectations. Martin Mnene is in Nyeri, Loro Otieno is in Kisumu, and all cameras are focused on the August House, where we will bring you live coverage of the proceedings there.
And in studio are Wangari Muikia, who is a public management specialist. We also have Diana Gishengo, Executive Director of TISA, FCPA, George Mokua, the ISPAC Chair, and Caxton Kinodia, a tax partner with KPMG.
Absolutely. And any time from now, we'll cross over to Parliament. As soon as the Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, the CS Treasury, goes there, we'll be there live to give you all the proceedings. But let's start the conversation right here in studio. And FCPA Mokua, I'll start with you on this conversation. A budget of 3.6 trillion shillings. Are we simply living beyond our means?
Thank you so much, viewers and Trevor and my colleagues here in the studio. 3.6 trillion, well, are we living beyond our means? I think...
All right. Hold that thought for a bit. I'll come back to you in just a bit. And then we cross over to Gishengo as well, who's about to talk to us. She's Executive Director for TISA. And Mokua, I think your microphone is okay now. So you were saying, are we living beyond our means, or this is an okay budget, 3.6 trillion?
Yeah, thank you so much, Trevor. And apologies for that, mishap. Yes, I can say we are somehow living beyond our means. And why do I say this? Our expenditure is growing faster than our revenues. And obviously, when you have your expenditure way above your ordinary revenues, then definitely you need to look at your priorities and align your expenditure accordingly. And therefore, I can say, Trevor, that indeed we are living beyond our means. And this is demonstrated by the fact that we find ourselves in the debt situation in which we are in as a country.
Okay. Diana?
Definitely the budget we have this year is an expanded budget from what we had last year. And at a time when we are reeling in debt, we honestly had hoped that the Kenya Kwanza budget would have been reduced, or at the minimum, we retained the budget we had last year and slash on certain spending. But instead, we have seen a significant increase in that particular budget. We see a few changes that could be encouraging if they are followed through, that social spending sectors have faced an increase. And if that happens, then we are investing more in more employment in sectors that people rely on: health, agriculture, education, and so on. But overall, we continue to live beyond our means, and the current fiscal deficit is very high. After we borrow all the loans, we still must marshal and whip people to pay more taxes to fill the deficit. So I foresee us not being able to meet most of the planned obligation under the budget estimate because we have a very, very huge deficit. Is it possible to, at one time, the economists will tell us, the accountants, they are here, they'll tell us, is it possible that we can, at one point in Kenya, have a budget that has no deficit? as we purport to be a nation that is keen on promoting a culture of saving, can we get a surplus budget at one point? That would be very, very encouraging, and I'm sure it would penetrate even into the education curricula, because everybody, even those who are in school learning, would understand and follow the steps of government and what is being reported, that government is planning like companies for surplus and for profit, not for deficit, but we are far, far, far from that.
All right. Before we get into that, let me just hear what the other panelists have to say about whether we're living beyond our means or not. Then we'll come to that conversation. Caxton, are we living beyond our means?
Yeah. Thank you, Trevor, for that question. And to my mind, and I believe mine is also a reasonable mind, there can be only one answer to that question, that we are living beyond our means. And especially when you consider that when this regime also came into power, the first promise was to find ways to cut expenditure, to generate savings of nearly 300 billion within the remainder of the financial year. So 6-8 months later, we have a budget which does not really align with that expectation that our expenditure was to be contained and that we were going to try and live within what we can afford. So I still feel, because we start with defining what our expenditure is, before we come to find out where we will find the resources to finance the budget, we always end up with bloated expenditure, and we struggle to raise the necessary revenue to fund that expenditure. So I believe we are living beyond our means.
Okay. Wikia?
It's interesting. I tend to agree with my colleagues here that it is quite a large budget. We were expecting a little bit different, because the story that we had been, or not the story, I shouldn't call it a story, but what we have been told is that we're going more into fiscal consolidation, and so we're expecting that the budget, even if it grew, it wouldn't grow that much, right? But then now it has grown pretty much in line with how budgets have been growing in the last, 5 years or so. So it is a bit surprising and concerning that the budget continues to grow. But I don't expect that I don't think there's any country world over that has a budget that is just purely financed by revenues. There must be some borrowing in there, because you have large infrastructure projects, and fiscal prudence dictates that if you're going to have larger infrastructure projects, you would need to borrow. Just as in, if you're in a house, you're getting a house, you get a mortgage, it's borrowing. So it's prudent for us to borrow, but when it gets out of hand, now year on year we keep busting our budget limits. We say we're going to keep a ceiling, and then the next minute we keep busting it, and now we're proposing an anchor. It begs the question on whether we are really planning well for our future.
Speaking of planning, all of you can agree that we are living beyond our means. The next question would be then, where do austerity measures come in? Caxton, you talked about this regime promising that they would cut back on expenditure. We have not seen that, but let me begin with you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Fiscal consolidation, and I think my colleague here said that there was a pronunciation that they wanted to cut down the overall expenditure by 300 billion, but when they went in, they realized that it's not possible. In fact, they were proposing to reduce conferencing, meetings, and traveling, that let the meetings be held in the boardrooms in the offices. But they didn't know that the biggest spender in this economy is the government. For example, what they were talking about is not having meetings in Naivasha and Mombasa. But they forgot that after the meetings are held this month in Mombasa or in Naivasha, the following month on 20th, VAT has to be paid, notwithstanding the fact that either Parliament, which held meetings there, has paid or not, because that's the tax point, it's accrued. And therefore, if they made that attempt not to hold meetings, in quotes, by holding those austerity measures of cutting off the budget by 300 billion, the following month on 20th, if it is White Sands where they were holding the hotel, the meetings, or it is Lake Naivasha Resort, the following month on 20th, the VAT payment by those hotels will go down, and KRA will be at the doorstep. They are very fast these days. They will call you on 21st. They will ask you, last month you paid 2 million shillings. This month you have paid 500,000 shillings. We want to come and verify. Then we tell them very fast, don't even come and verify, because the government, parliament, which was supposed to hold meetings here, they did not come. And indeed, David indeed said, the chief government advisor, the Economic Council said, if we make a mistake of reducing or cutting down those expenditure, the following month, the tax revenue collections from those institutions will go down. And therefore, it's very difficult, and that's the situation that we are in. When you are in a debt distress, it means your debt service obligations plus your recurrent expenditure more or less adds up to your ordinary revenue. Therefore, you have you're in a tight corner. There is no leg room for you to, do any adjustments, but it needs forecasting to the future beyond 5 years so that we can be able now to come down to manageable levels. And that's what I can say, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, what are your thoughts?
Definitely, we are in a fiscal consolidation, and we've been at it for some time. Maybe now it is more pronounced because everybody speaks about the debt trap and the debt burden that we are facing. I think if you look at it, nearly half of our budget will go into, more than half of our projected expenditure will go into debt repayment. When we are at that level, just compare it to your household. We are about to face an auction. So you decide whether you let go of this property or you rework your household budget entirely. Now, what we are not seeing is that particular reworking. Yes, there has been a reduction in the amount of money that is going into energy and infrastructure projects. But are we seeing more deliberate efforts? FCPM Okoa here has indicated we are still going to the same hotels. Hotels in this country are owed a lot of money. I'm not sure whether it is part of the pending bills that will be carried forward into this year by government institutions. From parliament to ministries to parastatals, they owe. Why? There was no money to disburse, but because the budget was approved and they knew part of their expenditure is to hold consultative meeting, induction, workshop, they went ahead. So we are carrying over that debt. Now, think about how you host a birthday when you have money. You get a caterer, you have fanfare, nice decor, and so on. When there is no money, you bake in your house. You sing happy birthday quietly. That is the phase we are in as a country of fiscal consolidation. Is that the feeling? No. All the key government institutions have a budget for upgrading cars. The roads are not so bad. Surely our cars can survive. Most of us, Kenyans, drive cars that are 7 years old, others 14. My father drives a car that is 20 years old. It is fine and is quite elderly. So these priorities by government do not point to fiscal consolidation. And part of the budget, there is a hiring for teachers, but there is increment of certain cadres of government, and especially the top cadres, we are seeing a salary increment. Why are we telling people that we need to tighten our belt while some other people have space to enjoy? So there is we are definitely in fiscal consolidation, but the top guns are sending mixed signals, and that is honestly very frustrating.
So Caxton, to use Diana's analogy, how do we bake that cake in the house?
Now, I really like the analogies that Diana is putting here, but allow me, Victoria, as I attempt to answer the question, how do we bake that cake, to just point out a few observations that I've made looking at this budget process. One, and which is a sad one, we have had a very robust public participation, if I may say so myself, and we have seen that the Committee of Parliament going out of its way to get the views of Kenyans. However, in the latter stages, we have seen a lot of economic reason or discourse around these provisions being drowned by political overtones. To me, that's a sad thing, and I hope we can get to a point where we can discuss about these provisions in a non-partisan way. We just apply ourselves to economic reason. Secondly, the budget proposals, in my view, that we have seen, most of them, not all of them, are meant for what we would call a thriving economy, not a surviving one. And we say timing is everything. We may want to do too many things, which is what most of these proposals, as I see them, are speaking to. Taxing people who are really suffering, the high cost of living and who may not actually have, this extra money to finance this budget. And we say this is when you expect the government to also be a lot more sensitive in terms of its timing. Just like a farmer does not plant until he knows that there are signs of rain, or a pilot does not really take the aeroplane to the runway until the conditions are right. So it is for governments. If the time is not right, some of these proposals could actually wait. And a government's obligation, once it has been given the mandate by the people to govern, it has an obligation to be sensitive. Reminds me of this quote I saw a few days ago of a person who said, he was using the word silly instead of, but I wouldn't use silly, I would use insensitive. And he says he no longer asks the question, how insensitive can you be? And because some people have been taking that to be a challenge. So you ask yourself, is our government taking, this question, how sensitive can it be, as a challenge? So a government has to be sensitive to its citizens' needs and circumstances. And part of the proposals, as we have analyzed them days on end, don't seem to speak to that sensitivity that needs to be displayed by government. As a result, we may have the law of unintended consequences kicking in. So how do I feel this cake? As we've said now, we cannot call birthday parties, we are going to bake in-house. FCP Mokua started as well. Diane has given us very good examples. I'll not get into those. I will just say, look, if I look at our expenditure, capital expenditure, because that is where I would say this is where we can make huge savings. The recurrent expenditure may, as bloated as it is, may not be easily done away with. We have people who have contracts working, civil service, letting them go, which is what a private business may do quite easily, may not be the same for government. However, some of these projects are nice to have. They are not must-haves. Diana is saying we have good roads, so if we have a project that really relates to some roads that are passable, this is a time to survive. You will thrive when the conditions are right. So let's cut down on some of these big projects and say, look, we would want to develop, but for this moment, we can go a little low. The next year, we see how things look like. And that way, we'll avoid the problem of having to borrow when we really do not have to. That would be my take.
Wangari, Caston has talked about shaving off the nice-to-haves, in terms of a measure to cut back. What do you see in terms of some effective austerity measures that the government could put in place at a time like this?
Well, we've talked about fiscal consolidation, but I think sometimes we forget that fiscal consolidation is two-pronged, right? We are going very strongly on the raising taxes, which is one part of fiscal consolidation, so that we can get enough revenues to, and actually the point of fiscal consolidation is to tame the inflation, which right now is at 8%, which is going pretty high, and to reduce the deficit. But here we see that we're working solely on the taxes. We're increasing the taxes, yet when we come to the expenditures continue to rise. So then we ask ourselves, well, if we're in a fiscal consolidation context, then is this really going to work because we're only doing it on one side? So there is potential for rationalizing the budget. I think interrogating the budget, we would find that there are opportunities for savings. We know we live in a country where we have a lot of challenges and corruption, and in fact, I think we're having corruption 2.0, or is it 3.0 now, where it's budgeted corruption. And even, I mean, if you just evaluate, we have an institution called the Controller Budget. The Controller Budget actually reviews the progress of projects, and if we find that projects are not are stalled or not useful anymore, or don't have the growth capacity that we had envisioned, then these are places for rationalization. They may be nice to put in a budget, but we need to really ask ourselves a hard question and say, is this what we need to do right now?
Yeah. But Chair, just as an accountant yourself, and I know you're in the FCPA, are we doing our math right? Because we know right now that there's even a push and pull in terms of how much our budget really is. There are people who say it's 3.6, but they haven't added the redemptions, which is 850 billion. That brings it to about 4.5 trillion. So if you're advising the government, is that where we should begin? Because it means they are saying right now that the deficit is 720 billion, but there's an 850 billion that has not been included in the budget. Is that where we're starting on a wrong footing? Ideally, how should our budget look like?
Yeah, thank you so much, Trevor. Of course, there is 3.6, 4.4. Of course, you take into account those redemptions and so on. But I want to believe that at maturity is just borrowing to pay off whatever is maturing at that time. Therefore, that's how they are trying to manage the debt situation that we are in. But let me see this on from the onset, and perhaps to Robin on what my colleagues have said. We are concentrating much on discussing about the expenditure, but we are forgetting that we're also supposed to discuss on how we can grow our revenues.
Yeah.
When I look at the budget that's before us, you know, finance bill has two objectives, key objectives. One is to raise taxes to finance government expenditure. And then number two, which apparently is forgotten from this budget which is here, is how to spur economic growth and give incentives to key sectors like manufacturing and agriculture, so that we can be able to raise tax revenues. And we have forgotten on how do we incentivize, especially the micro, medium size and small enterprises, the MSMEs. We have about 7.8 million of them. And according to the study of the World Bank or IMF, it says that there's potential of 2.8 trillion that we can be able to collect annually, which we are not able to collect as we speak at the moment. So we plug in this 2.8 into the ordinary tax revenues, then we are able to sort out the issue that we are talking about in terms of budget deficit and so on. So yes, are we doing correct balancing of books? But let me respond to you and say, I think my colleague CPA Kimani Kuria, the chair, I think has done a commendable good job in terms of balancing the books and plugging the figures from 2%, 1%, 12%, 15%, 25 million, 1 million. I'm sure that he was sitting somewhere in an Excel sheet, and then he had done this nice modeling, and therefore when this thing was not working, was able, to move figures from, one Excel cell to another, and he was able to balance the books. He has done a good job in my view as an accountant.